But then entered Black Lives Matter. The movement birthed after the Zimmerman verdict of not guilty. That's right, Zimmerman verdict, not Trayvon Martin verdict. Zimmerman's verdict of not guilty aims at affirming all black lives, period. No matter the condition or position, no matter one's situation or infatuation, Black Lives Matter. Started by Lisa Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Oprah Tometi, BLM positions itself as what the founders call an ideological and political intervention in a world lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. Moreover, it goes beyond just speaking on and speaking about state-sponsored violence committed against black bodies. It also goes beyond what the founders call the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some black communities, which merely call on black people to love black, live black, and buy black, keeping straight cis black men in front of the movement while sisters, queers, trans, and disabled folk take up roles in the background or not at all. There's a unique contribution that attempts to center the lives of black queer and trans folk, disabled folk, black undocumented folk, folk with records, women and all black lives along the gender spectrum that people and history have marginalized within black liberation movements. And this movement is unapologetically black and specific in its aims. It is reminiscent, yes, of the Black Power movement, as Dr. Joseph said in this room on last week. And though unapologetically black, it does not dismiss other lives. According to Garza, Black Lives Matter doesn't mean your life is not important. It means that black lives, which are seen as without value within white supremacy, are important to your liberation. Given this disproportionate impact of state violence on black lives, we understand that when black people in this country get free, the benefits will be wide-reaching and transformative in all of society. In short, when black people get free, everybody gets free. And achieving this freedom, one way it happens is by way of testimony and the sharing of black truth. While the Black Lives Matter movement operates on many different levels, from protest to research to teach-ins to even electoral politics, you get D-Ray running for mayor now of Baltimore. It has always, though, been a safe space for sharing of one's testimony. It's been the place where one could tell one's own story of interactions with police or at work or at home, and not have others questioning your story and looking disapprovingly upon you, sucking their teeth and wondering if you are just being too sensitive. It's been a place where one could go and be whoever they were created to be and find the love that the wider society does not give a lot of times. In short, it has been a space where black truth has been affirmed. It is a space where black truth and testimony come to live because wider society has always viewed black truth as suspect. Black truth and testimony has always been questioned and viewed as inaccurate. It's almost as if truth and blackness cannot coincide with one another. Black truth was somehow tainted because of the conditions black folk found themselves. And for a long period in this country, black testimony was not given in courts, and black people could not testify in any case against a white person. This, of course, led to the banning of black people from juries and from courtrooms, period, unless, of course, they were in the role of defendants. Even in our scholarship, there was a bias against black truth. For most of the first half of the 20th century, scholars writing about and studying slavery and Reconstruction discounted testimony from black people. One historian dismissed the autobiographies and other writings from black folk during this period and called them and labeled them dubious. And many of that is of dubious value. Though much better today, there is still a pushback from the voices of black people, as evident in one reviewer review of Ed Baptist's marvelous work, The Half Has Never Been Told, in a review that appeared in The Economist, which they had now since withdrawn, but left up for transparency's sake, admitting their mistake. The reviewer complained that, quote, Mr. Baptist has not written an objective history of slavery. Almost all the blacks in his book are victims. Almost all the whites villains. This is not history, it is advocacy. Maybe this reviewer had a hard time dealing with the fact that Baptist drew heavily on black truth and testimony. So naturally, the work could not be serious work. Moreover, instead of seeing this work as truthful, or at least some account of the truth that can bring out more truth as we keep digging and researching the time periods, the reviewer had to name it advocacy or something else rhetorically specious, because it just didn't make any sense to believe black voices. However, there was a time when black truth seemed to matter, at least for a moment. There was this one time, and not at band camp, but this one time. Yeah, y'all got that. Back in 1866, right here in Memphis, Tennessee, that some black folk came forward to testify about an atrocity that had happened to them May 1st through the 3rd. Not long after the vestiges of slavery, and still dealing with some form of PTSD from the enslaved experience. These brave women and men came forward and foreshadowed others who would come later, bearing black truth in their bosoms or as fire shut up in their bones. Shortly after the massacre, a congressional committee arrived in Memphis to investigate the massacre. And during their investigation and interview process, the committee discovered that 46 black people died, 285 people injured, over 100 houses and other property belonging to African Americans burned. And by the way, we don't have really time to talk about the black wealth that was lost, that did not get a chance to be passed down generation after generation. I save that for another lecture. However, also part of the massacre echoes what just recently took place last year with Daniel Holdsclaw. The rape of at least 5 women. According to the report, the crowning acts of atrocity and diabolism committed during these terrible nights were the ravishing of 5 different colored women by these fiends of human shape, independent of other attempts at rape. The details of these outrages are too shocking and disgusting character to be given at length in this report, and reference must be had to the testimony of the parties. It is a singular fact that while this mob was breathing vengeance against the Negroes and shooting them down like dogs, yet when they found unprotected colored women, they at once conquered their prejudices and proceeded to violate them under circumstances of the most brutal of all brutalities. One of the testimonies came from Francis Thompson, who had been enslaved and, as the testimony read, and was crippled, using crutches because she had cancer on her foot. On Tuesday night, 7 men, 2 of them who were policemen, came to her house. She knew the 2 to be policemen by their stars. They were all Irishmen. They first demanded that she would get supper for them, which she did. After supper, the wretches threw all of the provisions that were in the house, which had not been consumed, out into the bayou. They then laid hold of Frances, hitting her upside of her head and kicking her. The woman was then violated by 4 of the men and so beaten and bruised that she laid in bed for 3 days. They were in the house nearly 4 hours. When they left, they said they intended to burn up the last goddamn nigger and drive all the Yankees out of town. Another case is that of Rebecca Ann Bloom, who was ravaged on the night of May 2nd. According to testimony, she was in the bed with her husband when 5 men broke open the door and came to her house. They professed to have the authority to arrest Mr. Bloom and threatened to take him to the station house unless he should pay them $25 extortion. Not having the money, he went out to raise it, and while absent, one of the men assaulted the wife and threatened to kill her if she did not let him do as he wished, brandishing a knife and swearing she must submit to his wishes. He accomplished this brutal purpose. Then there was the case of Lucy Tibbs. Part of 7 men broke into her house on Tuesday night and demanded to know where her husband was. She was with her 2 little children, the ages of 5 and 2 years old, respectfully. She implored them not to do anything to her as she was just there with her 2 little children. And while the others of the party were plundering the house, one man threatened to kill her if she did not submit to his wishes. And although another man, discovering her situation, interfered and told him to leave the woman alone, that she was not in a situation to do that, let the hearer understand, the brute did not desist, but succeeded in violating her person in the presence of the other 6 men. She was obliged to submit, as the house was full of men, and she thought that they would kill her, as they stabbed the woman the previous night in her neighborhood. And listen to all of the atrocities that the white mob committed. The report concludes that hardly any crime seemed to have been omitted. There was burglary, robbery, arson, mayhem, rape, assassination, murder committed under circumstances of the most revolting atrocity, the details of which in every case are fully set out in the testimony. In many cases, Negroes were murdered and their bodies remained on the ground for 48 hours. 4 hours, Mike Brown, 48 hours. The relatives and friends of the murdered parties being afraid to appear on the street to claim dead bodies, and the authorities permitted them to remain longer than they would have permitted the body of a dead dog to remain on the street. It was these and other testimonies that made it into a congressional report that's available for all of us to go and read today. We have a link to it on the website. As Stephen Ash argued in his book, A Massacre in Memphis, that the massacre provoked the U.S. government to take extraordinary measures to protect free people. The 1866 midterm elections ushered in Republican majorities in both the House and Senate that struck down President Johnson's Reconstruction measures and now put in congressional Reconstruction. And in that, the federal government imposed temporary federal military rule on the recalcitrant southern states. States had to adopt new constitutions that granted black men the right to vote, yes, black men, and they must agree to ratify the 14th Amendment. In the debates that ensued, the story of the Memphis Massacre and the testimony of black folk figured prominently in their decision making. This led to the first attempt at a biracial democracy that scholars now say produced some good outcome.